All right, folks, for your next oil painting assignment, we are going to get into the style of surrealism. And to understand where surrealism is coming from, you've really got to understand the history of the art world during the turn of the 20th century and what was going on in the realm of psychology during the 20th century. So, surrealism started in the early 1900s in Paris, France, at the same time that impressionistic painters were working, the same time that realistic painters, romantic painters, abstract expressionist painters. There's all sorts of different artistic movements happening in Paris at the same time that surrealism came around. And what really makes surrealism stand out from all of those different styles of art is the idea of this hyper real or this hyper fantastic realism that's tied directly to the subconscious mind, specifically to our experiences of dreams. So to understand this, we've got to go back and we've got to look at the early writings of Sigmund Freud. Freud was a Belgish psychologist that was doing a lot of research based on the idea of the subconscious mind. He believed that in everybody's brain there's the conscious mind that is awake, the conscious mind that is aware of things that are going around you, and is interacting with the world that's around you. Freud would say that the subconscious mind is a part of the mind that is always on. It is the part of the mind that is always trying to work through different problems and experiences, whether or not you know it's happening or not. Freud would also go on to write and say that it is our subconscious mind that is in control and responsible for the dreams that we have while we're asleep. This was a really novel idea back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This idea that we've got two parts of our brain, the brain that's awake and the brain that is a part of the subconscious, and it really affected the way that artists ended up creating artwork. So what surrealism is really all about is it's about this idea of the fantastic. It's about being able to go in and create works of art that has elements of realism to it, but also elements that are fantastic that almost seem dreamlike. So in this instance, you can see all of the landscape down at the bottom, everything underneath this line of the painting. It does seem realistic and does seem like something that you could see in the real day world. Where the dreamscape and the fantastic comes in is when you start to see the clouds that are turning into the hot air balloon coming down. And so this fantastic realism, that's a thing that I definitely want you to pay attention to. As we go through this slideshow, the other thing that I want you to pay attention to is how each of these paintings that are built up uses a colored ground. In other words, in the previous assignment that you worked on, you were going in and doing work that was based on the process of underpainting. For this particular assignment, we're not going to be doing underpainting. Instead, I want you to go and to dissect each of these pieces and look at how the background colors, how there are common colors that come all the way through. So in this piece, you've got that light yellowish brown at the base that fades up all the way up into that muted neutral blue on the top. For this painting, the artist, instead of going in and doing a monochromatic neutral painting of all of this, they wouldn't start off this way. Instead, they would go in and on their canvas, they would have the bottom edge, the bottom part of the canvas, all painted in this color, and then they would create that color fade up to that blue first, get those base tones in, and then they go in and they build on top of it. So just keep that in the back of your head as we're moving forward. So throughout the history of surrealism, There's a bunch of different styles that you can go with. And really, what I want you to pay attention to is this idea of the fantastic realism. How you can see that in each of these pictures, there's things that you are able to recognize for what they are, but they are being put together in a way that makes it seem dreamlike, that makes it seem fantastic, that makes it bend the frame of reality. So you're in this instance, everything seems realistic, from the windmills to the clouds to the landscape itself. Even the butterflies are realistically painted, but it's by going in and combining these two things together that creates this dreamlike effect. This is really what you are after in this particular piece. Other pieces, it could be something as simple as portraits, where you have things that are covered up that are not natural. You can go in, you can create in with this, just like your dreams, just like your sleeping dreams. Anything that you dream while you're in the dream is going to seem realistic, and that's exactly what you're trying to capture. Not necessarily the dream itself, but I want you to create an image that is realistic in that reality that you're making, but in the reality of us looking at a work of art or looking at the painting, that you're really going in and blending those realities together, whether or not that's creating creatures or monsters back in the background of whatever scene you're making, or if it's humanizing or anamorphizing the animals and creating like animal people. Like, really, if you've dreamt it, or if there's a possibility that you dream it, that this is totally open for you as far as this project. You're just trying to create that different sense of reality. These are two pieces done by the Arizona artist Joe Sorensen. He's real, like, I love the stylized process, and while this is not realistic, he definitely creates a different reality. He definitely creates an atmosphere of how these pictures create a different place that he is transporting you, the viewer. If you look at this as the tonal ground or the colored ground that is being laid down on this piece, it's mostly this muted out blue and gray throughout the entire portion. For this piece, it's that rosish peach in the back and the green down on the base. So this would be divided up into two different sections. So if we're talking about artists that deal with surrealism, we have to talk about the Spanish artist Salvador Dali. Dali was born in the late 1800s, and he is really the poster child for the surrealistic art movement. Dali went out of his way to push the boundaries of what normal is. He really went out of his way to make sure that the eccentricities of his personality, he let that be the forefront of what his artistic persona was. To put this lightly, Dali was never embraced the idea of I'm a normal person. In fact, it is well documented that Dali was not normal. Dali was a little bit off of his rocker. And what makes Dali's work stand out so much is how much he was a showman and how much he embraced his own eccentricities and strangeness in his everyday actions. Dali worked in what he would consider to be the paranoid critical method. It is a method of creativity where Dali would say that he did not, in all of his paintings, he would say that he didn't have a plan moving forward. What Dali says that he would do is he'd go in and he'd lay down his colored ground. In this instance, it's that blue to yellow going all the way through. You can see that yellow in here. That yellow is found in the wood. You've got tinges of that yellow found in the ground. You've got tinges of yellow found in the people. And once that colored ground was laid down, he would just go in and he would start painting shapes. He would start painting lines, and eventually those lines and shapes would turn into things. For Dali, his reasoning behind that was by going in without having a plan, without knowing exactly what it was that he was painting. He was coming through, and he said that he was allowing his subconscious mind to have a voice through his artwork. That being said, there's a ton of symbolism that's going on in each of the works that he makes. One of the most common symbols with Dali are the melted figures. In this instance, this is probably his most famous painting that he's ever done, is entitled The Persistence of Memory. You've got the clocks that are melted. You have the face that is the face of the person that is melted and falling apart, and then you've got the bugs and the ants. The melted face represents a fundamental weakness. It shows something not being strong, not being able to stand on its own. The ants represent decay. So in The Persistence of Memory, what is Dali really saying here? What does he say that his subconscious is saying? That our memories as human beings are all flawed. Things that we remember from 10 years ago, things we remember from 5 years ago, things that we remembered last week, maybe even things that we remembered yesterday. In our own brains, our human experience, we change things. We change things to fit a narrative that we're telling ourselves, or we change things based on our feelings or emotions. What Dali is saying is that human memory is not as strong or as powerful as what we like to think it is. Here's some other ones. Dali loved to use symbolisms all over the place. A very, very common symbol that he uses is a portrait of his father. This is him here. Notice the swans, that when you look at the swans on the lakeside, they are reflecting elephants. Dali really, really liked the idea of the double image. In this piece, this is entitled The Soft Self-Portrait with a Side of Bacon. You see very, very common themes of the melting face, right? And so this is a portrait of himself. Dali is doing a self-critique. He is showing his own weaknesses in character, and like he had plenty of weaknesses. If you look at it, there are ants that are eating away at the corner of his eye and the corner of his mouth. So he's showing his own weaknesses of his personality, but he's also saying that these weaknesses are often deteriorating and falling apart. The third the third symbol that Dali has in this painting is the symbol of the crutch. The need to prop up, the need to appear strong, the need to appear not weak. So with Dali, Dali had such an eccentric personality from his adolescence through his teenage years all the way through to his early adulthood. He drastically wanted to fit in. He drastically wanted to be accepted, but he was not a normal human being. He didn't act in a normal way. He didn't think in a normal way. And one of the reasons why that it's been hypothesized that Dali acted the way that he did is when he was real young, living in Spain, his parents used to give him liquid mercury to play with. And liquid mercury is a carcinogen. It's a heavy metal that as soon as it touches your skin, it gets into your bloodstream, and then the blood comes and it transports little bits of mercury throughout your body, and it collects in your brain. The more you're exposed to mercury, the more it collects in your brain, which means the more it fundamentally changes the way you act and the way that you think forever. So that's definitely a thing. Second thing with Dali, he really, really wanted a girlfriend. He was so infatuated with the opposite sex, and he wanted to really be in a relationship, but he couldn't make himself act normal to save his life. So he ended up scaring most of the girls and women that he was interested in. He scared most of them away until he met his wife, who he was married to for like 40 years. One partner for his entire life. And when I talk about Dali and I talk about his eccentricities, this guy was crazy. He was crazy. So his first major show in the United States, he went to the New York City. He had an opening in New York City at one of the big art galleries, and he'd already made a name for himself in Europe. He was already hanging out with Pablo Picasso. He was already hanging out with Joan Miro. He was already working with the big art names in Europe, but he hadn't broken into the United States yet. And so you've got it's pre-depression. There's people that were absolutely a part of the art world that were collectors that had heard his name but hadn't experienced or had an opportunity to see his work. And so the night of the opening happens, okay? And I just want you to picture, I want you to go there in your mind of you're in an art gallery and you're surrounded by old men wearing top hats and dressed super nice. You're surrounded by women in furs, and there's diamonds, and they're all super, super rich. And there's all sorts of paintings like this floating around the gallery. And they're waiting. They're waiting for this artist Salvador Dali to come in, so they get to meet him, and he gets to like talk him up and try to sell his work. So he's 10 minutes late, he's 15 minutes late, he's half an hour late, he's 45 minutes late. Finally, he comes walking in, and it's almost comical. He walks in, and he's wearing a giant top hat, and he walks in, and he's wearing dressed to the nines in these great big long tail tuxedo robes, and he's carrying a loaf of French bread that's about 3 feet tall. And he walks in, and everybody starts golf clapping and like, oh, bravo, Dali, your work is so good. And Dali comes in, and he's standing in the center of the gallery. And he looks around at all of these people, and he picks up his loaf of French bread, and he starts beating the hell out of them. Starts using it like a baseball bat, and just starts smacking and hitting and smacking and hitting. Yelling obscenities at these people in Spanish. Eventually, the loaf of French bread breaks. He goes over to a sculpture that he made. He picks it up, and he throws it through the window of the gallery, and he storms out. He's in the place for like a grand total of maybe 2 minutes, and then he leaves in anger. Nothing like that had been done before. And you know what ended up happening? All of the artwork from that gallery got sold that night because it became an experience. It became people that were at that gallery at that opening that actually got hit in the head by Dali's loaf of French bread were able to go, I was there, and I bought that. It turned into bragging rights. And so as we go through the 1920s all the way to the 1950s and 1960s, Dali made a really, really big name for himself, putting on shows and putting on spectacles to the point of where the rich and famous, musicians, actors, actresses, authors, they wanted to have a piece of work done by Dali. They wanted their portraits painted, and Dali charged them crazy amounts of money and ended up becoming really, really rich, to the point that other artists in the surrealist movement looked at Salvador Dali and started calling him Evita Dollars in The Money for Life. They said that he basically sold out, and you could argue he sold out, or you could argue he didn't. But one thing that he definitely did do is he took his eccentricities and his crazy ideas, and he was able to market it. He was able to put it forward in a way that made people want to buy his artwork. This lasted all the way through the end of World War II, and once we hit the end of World War II, specifically the dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan, you see a big change in Dali's style. Dali had a hard time once America bombed Japan, and once he saw the power of the atomic bomb and the power of this weapon of mass destruction. First thing that Dali did is he tried to come to terms with it. He tried to understand it, and the best way for him to understand it was to turn to religion. He turned to the Catholic Church, and he started making paintings that were trying to separate this idea of science and religion in a way that he could make sense of all of it together. This painting is titled "The Virgin of Port Lagat." This is a portrait of his wife Gala as the Virgin Mary, and he's taking these religious pieces, the religious iconography of the egg, of the bread, of the glass of wine, and he's breaking it apart using physics, having things that are floating, having things that are broken apart, having holes and gaps. He's talking about atoms and molecular structure. He's trying to take these two different worlds and he's trying to put them together so that he can make sense of things, but he's also doing it in the surrealistic style. These two paintings, we've got the crucified Christ of Port Lagat, and you've got the Madonna of Port Lagat. These two paintings were painted in the 1950s, and they were really, really controversial, especially the painting of the Christ. This actually got him kicked out of the Catholic Church. Dali was not painting this with any intention of being disrespectful, but the church saw this painting and was very, very offended simply by how the viewer of this painting is looking down on the Christ. It was a huge piece of controversy. With Dali, Dali lived until the 1980s. He died just a few months after his wife Gala died, and after she died, he lost the will to live. Stopped eating, stopped drinking, and eventually he died in a house fire, which is hypothesized that it was a house fire that he set himself because without his wife, he could not go on.